The American dream is dead, and it is not coming back. I'm an American who's been traveling the world and living abroad for nearly 2 years. And in that time, I've come to realize that not only is the American dream dead, but it's being actively replaced with something even better. But before I divulge what that something is, we need to expose the harsh truth about the USA. Now, you heard me mention that I've been traveling the world and living abroad for nearly 2 years, but my first experience abroad was actually a little over 11 years ago when I traveled to Turks and Caicos with some extended family members. Now, like most people who travel to Turks and Caicos, we stayed on a resort, and that is where we spent about 95% of our time. But there was one day out of that trip where we actually ventured off of the resort. And when we ventured off of the resort, I quickly realized why people are so eager to go to the USA. It's because the rest of the world, at least the rest of the world to my 12-year-old mind at that time, was inferior. That's not to say that it didn't have its good qualities, but the level of poverty that I saw out there was absolutely mind-blowing to me. And suddenly it clicked. This is why I hear stories of people literally risking their lives, swimming across the border if they have to provide themselves and their children with better opportunities. This is why I know people who go to my school who are there illegally. This is why my own mother and her whole entire side of the family uprooted their lives in the Philippines to restart in a country that they had never previously visited, that country being the USA. It's because the USA is much better than countries like Turks and Caicos. It's much better than countries like the Philippines, or at least it was. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because I suspect this is where a lot of the American delusion actually comes from. The reason why Americans tend to believe that America is the best country is not just because of all the conditioning we receive, where we're saying the Pledge of Allegiance to a flag from the time we're, 5 years old until we're 18 years old, or what we hear in the media about America being the best. But it's also anecdotally, especially if you live in a border state, or in a place that has a large international presence, you're surrounded by people who actively decided to go to America from their home countries. And so you naturally grow up believing that America must be better than the rest of the world. Otherwise, why would these people be here? But once I actually traveled to another developed country, that country being Spain, and then shortly thereafter Switzerland, and then I moved to the Netherlands and experienced that lifestyle, what I realized was that America is like a bad restaurant that serves very hungry customers. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, if you're coming from the slums of Mexico, of Guadalajara, or you're coming from Haiti, or the Philippines, India, places like this that have immense poverty rates, of course, the US is going to provide you with much better opportunities. It's common sense. It's not rocket science. You're going to be much better off being an average person in the US than you will be as an average person in a place like India, for example. But these people who go to this proverbial restaurant, they're not necessarily looking for the same meal. You see, when people from these countries go to the USA, they're looking for the American dream, but the American dream is not a solitary thing. The American dream has different forms. It means something different to everyone, but I believe that everyone's American dream falls into one of two categories, the first of which being what I call the 9-to-5 category. This is the category where people want to work a regular job, 9 to 5, maybe 9 to 6 sometimes, and that job will then provide them with enough money to own a house, preferably in a nice neighborhood, have 2 kids and take care of their kids and send their kids to school, have 2 cars, and just generally have all of the creature comforts that come with living in a developed country. And a great example of this would be post-World War II America. I read about this in a book called The Psychology of Money a few months ago. Basically, the author was saying that in post-World War II America, the defining feature for why that was the quote-unquote golden age of the US and the American dream is because the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class were all living relatively similar lives, materially speaking. And so it was very achievable to own a house and have a stay-at-home wife, raise 2 kids, maybe even 3 kids, and own a car all on one salary, and a blue-collar salary at that, as a plumber, working on an assembly line, as a police officer, so on and so forth. You could make your way with just a regular job, a 9 to 5. That is the first version of the American dream, and that version, we all know, is pretty much dead. The days of earning an average salary and taking care of your whole entire family, or your nuclear family at the very least, are pretty much over in 2025 and beyond. And the real reason why that's the case is because those manufacturing jobs have been sent offshore to places like India, the Philippines, Mexico, etc. These low cost of living countries where people are able to work and willing to work for much, much cheaper. Now, the second path is the entrepreneurial path. The entrepreneurial path is for people, generally speaking, who want to have more than the average person. They don't want the regular house in the regular neighborhood with the regular car. They want to live in Beverly Hills. They want to drive a Rolls Royce or a Lamborghini. They want to live much better, materially speaking, than your average American. The American who would be in that first category. And sure, not every entrepreneur is trying to live an extravagant lifestyle, but I don't know a whole lot of entrepreneurs, and I say this as an entrepreneur myself, I don't know a whole lot of entrepreneurs who didn't initially at least consider the possibility of getting rich when they decided to take on the risk of being an entrepreneur, because this stuff is very hard. Volatility is a feature, not a bug. This is not for the faint of heart. And so most people who decide to pursue this path generally want to experience something that makes the path feel justifiable. And for most of those people, that is going to be material wealth. Whether that means they live a nice lifestyle or they have a lot of money in the bank is irrelevant. And to back up this claim, I recently read a book called Millionaire Next Door. And this study basically showed that most millionaires in the US are entrepreneurs. The overwhelming majority are entrepreneurs running small businesses, local businesses like plumbing businesses, HVAC businesses, etc. The people who decided to take that blue collar job from that first American dream category and start a business out of it. That is the second version of the American dream. And while it is still alive, especially with the advent of the internet, again, because of the cost of living and the general increasing gap between the rich and the poor, when you're an entrepreneur who's bootstrapping your business, the likelihood is that you're never going to get to that rich category. That's just the harsh reality, statistically speaking, is that most entrepreneurs will never get rich. And so what does this actually mean? What this means is that for the vast majority of Americans, the American dream is dead, at least in the USA. Because what I found is that, again, there's something even better waiting for you on the other side of a plane ride. Now, there are 2 potential paths that you can take depending on which category you fall into in terms of your perception of the American dream. If you see the 9 to 5 path, the path of economic equality, of the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class, all living similar material lifestyles as being desirable, then I would highly recommend that you do whatever you can, if you're an American watching this, to move to Europe, and Western Europe specifically. The Netherlands, for example, Germany, France, Switzerland, Belgium. These are countries that are going to provide you with the version of the American dream that you have likely aspired to throughout your lifetime. And what are some features of this particular path? What are some differences in the lifestyle of a Western European compared to an American? Well, for starters, healthcare is much, much cheaper. I won't say it's free because obviously they're paying for it with their taxes, but you won't really see a whole lot of Western Europeans, if any, who are carrying $20,000, $50,000, $100,000, or $1 million in medical loan debt. You just won't see that. And most Europeans can't even conceive of those kinds of numbers because truthfully, especially for a developed nation that claims to be the best nation on earth, those numbers are pretty dystopian. Any system that enables those kinds of numbers must be dystopian and surely are not indicative of a country that is worth your blood, sweat, and tears. Now, aside from healthcare, you have affordable higher education. Again, for your average 9-to-5 worker, part of that dream, that American dream, is having kids. And when you have kids, generally, you're going to want them to get the most education that they possibly can, at least as much as it aligns with their personal interests. So, in the US, generally, you want to send your kids to either college or trade school. Now, I don't know about trade school in the US. What I do know is that college or university in the US is obscenely expensive. And I've made various videos about this. This is a big part of the reason why I dropped out of college. It's because if you're not on a full ride scholarship, honestly, it's kind of just not worth it. Either you have a full ride, you major in medicine, law, engineering. That's it. If you're not doing something like that, I don't really think college is worth it for most people. Obviously, we still need skilled workers, but that doesn't mean that you have to be a skilled worker in the US and accumulate $80,000 or $100,000 in student loan debt to acquire those skills that German kids and Finnish kids are getting for free, or at least much, much cheaper, pennies on the dollar compared to what you're paying for your kids. Or if you don't have the means to pay for your kids, that your kids are pulling out loans for. And let's not even get into the interest rates on those. Now, aside from the affordable higher education and the affordable healthcare, you also have people-centric urban planning. Now, this is a whole rabbit hole that I can sit here and make multiple videos about. You obviously have channels like Not Just Bikes that have literally made a whole entire brand out of this, but I'm gonna give you the Cliff Notes version of what this actually means in your day-to-day life. I want you to imagine your car payment. Imagine how much you've spent in repair bills. Imagine how much you're spending on gasoline. Imagine how much you're spending on everything pertaining to having a car, insurance, all of it. And take that number and simply discard it. Imagine not having to pay that number anymore. That is what living in a people-centric city will do for you. And the cool thing about Western Europe is that unlike in the US, you don't have to live in a very big city, an Alpha plus city, to live a car-free lifestyle. In the US, if you want to live without a car, you're basically confined to New York City, Chicago, DC, and Boston. Maybe Seattle. All of these are high cost of living cities. In Europe, you can live in a town of 12,000 people and get by perfectly fine without a car. And I know this because I myself did it. Now, you get all of that for a lower cost of living. You have a lower cost of living. Now, you might be thinking, well, Jordan, if they have a lower cost of living, they probably have lower salaries as well. And that is true. Granted, a place like Switzerland, a place like Zurich or Geneva specifically, will give you a salary that is on par with just about anything you'd find in the US, bar maybe San Francisco and New York City. But I digress. Even though you might make less on the front end and you might pay more in taxes, again, when you take into account not having to pay $500 or $1,000 a month for single person health insurance, when you take into account not having to pay $1,000 a month in student loan debt, plus interest, when you take into account not needing to own a car, suddenly you realize that, they might be coming away better. In many cases, they are, especially in places like Switzerland or Norway, which also have the high incomes in addition to the social services that make that higher quality of life possible. Now, if I haven't convinced you to leave the USA yet, then maybe you belong in that second category. Maybe you are an entrepreneurial minded person, which is cool. That's perfectly fine. Again, the reality, statistically speaking, is that as an entrepreneur, you're likely never going to make a very high income. And that's okay because you don't have to. In the US, you do. Because in the US, as an entrepreneur, you have to pay extra taxes, okay, self-employment tax. You have to pay more for health insurance. And it's going to be very difficult for you to rent an apartment because they want to see the proof of consistent income, so on and so forth. It's an absolute headache unless you are literally in the top 1% as an entrepreneur. And even if you're in the top 1%, again, volatility is a feature, not a bug. So that $100,000 a year could very quickly become $50,000 a year or $25,000 a year. I've seen my income get cut in half. It's not a good feeling, especially when you're paying American expenses. And that's why if you fall into that category and you have the means to convert your business to being digital, I would highly advise you to take this second path, which is catch a flight to Southeast Asia. Now, why do I say Southeast Asia? I say that because that's the place that I have experience with. I have been traveling through Southeast Asia for nearly 6 months now, and whatever hype you've heard about it online is true. It lives up to the hype. Okay, this apartment that I'm in right now, it's not the biggest apartment, but I'm on the 19th floor. It's a luxurious apartment, has a pool, a gym, multiple grocery stores and restaurants within walking distance, and I am paying $382 per month for this apartment. You can live a bargain luxury lifestyle. You can have all the opulence you want, but for a very cheap price. There is no way I would be living on the 19th floor anywhere in the US or Western Europe for that matter. But here I am, and I'm still able to put money away. I'm able to invest into the stock market for the first time in my life. And I'm able to take care of my girlfriend while she builds her business up. And that opportunity right there is priceless. I'm leveraging both of these options by first living here in Southeast Asia to accumulate as much money as I possibly can over the next 5 or so years, to then move to Western Europe, preferably back to the Netherlands, and settle down there for the long term.